So today I thought I'd talk to you about a hobby of mine that's grown beyond any scale I'd ever imagined, and a book that changed my life. And it's this book, Dartmoor 365 by John Hayward. Back in the early 1990s, John Hayward realised that the Dartmoor National Park was exactly 365 square miles in size. It's grown a little bit since then. And being someone who knew a great deal about the moor, he decided to go back and explore each square of the moor and find some interesting object that's worth visiting in each square, and then publish this book, having published shorter books before, indicating what was in each square and giving people a chance to go and hunt for them. I've really enjoyed it, and it's something that I've called 365ing, and it's become a bit of a big thing now. A little more of that later, though. So here's an extract from the book, which kind of puts it into perspective. The coincidence of there being 365 days in the year and 365 square miles in the Dartmoor National Park was an acorn that grew into an oak tree of exploration and resulted in this book. It must also be admitted that the satisfaction of collecting things and of knowing that a complete collection was easily attainable spurred me on and made the visiting of every one of those miles a labour of pleasure. So the book, it's quite a thick book, dedicates each page to a single square mile of the national park and an item or some items that might be interesting to see in those squares. How I initially came across this was I bought the book in the Princetown Visitors Centre, which is a Dartmoor National Park Visitors Centre, has lots of books, and I just thought that the pages were interesting, the drawings he'd done in the book were fascinating, and many of them quite amusing. And I'd always been, whilst I was teaching down in the southwest, a walking instructor, and I instructed or helped to instruct groups doing the 10 Tours challenge. What I had realised, though, was that during 10 tours, you tend to move quite quickly. You don't spend a lot of time exploring the moor and looking at items on the moor. It's more a case of getting from tour to tour to make sure you can do these huge 35, 45 and 55 mile routes in the allotted time scale. So I'd covered a huge area on the moor whilst training groups out there and walking myself, never really stopping to take the time to actually have a look at things. So when I bought this book, I suddenly realised that I'd been on most of the moor, but most of the things that were mentioned in the book I blasted straight past and never even had a look at. So since then, particularly working with Duke of Edinburgh groups out on the moor, I've spent more time actually exploring in detail, and sometimes I might spend an hour or two just in one square. Now this might be deep in the middle of the moor, somewhere like Cranmere Pool, or it might be one of the local villages, which I would normally have just driven straight through, taking time to look around, look at the churches, look at the buildings, etc., and really take more of an interest in the history of Dartmoor. So a little bit more about 365ing and what it is. As I explained earlier, the book contains items in all of the 365 square miles of the national park. And the idea isn't that you visit one necessarily every day of the year, but you visit the squares when you feel like it. But here's where the extra twist comes, because inside the book there's a grid. There's the blank grid, and you work your way A1, A2, A3 or similar, somewhat like the battleships grid. And then when you've actually visited a square and seen an item in it, you can then colour in the grid next to it to say where you've been. Now you'll notice that mine's reasonably coloured in at the moment, though I've probably been to most of these squares, but I've probably forgotten when I did it. So I've started colouring them in again when I actually visited them perhaps a second or a third time. And the Southmoor has been particularly difficult for me to get to because I don't do much training out there, haven't taken many groups out there, so maybe I'll need to direct some energies in that direction at some time. And I think there are very few people who have actually used the book and visited every single square, though in the National Park Authority boardroom there's a lovely photo montage of one of the members of the National Park Authority at the time who has taken a photograph in each square and then made a montage, and it makes for the same shape as the grid in the book. What's particularly lovely about the book is the way it tells you an awful lot about each region you might be visiting. And it's quite a heavy thing to carry around in your rucksack. So I tend to make photocopies of the places that I want to visit. So here's Hisley Bridge. So when I get there, I know that I haven't missed any of the features, and I often have to return. And I sometimes do a little tick to say when I've been there. This one's a bit crossed out because I've been there many times and had a look at the bridge and the gatepost. And that's square J20 with a lot of information about it. So let's have an excerpt from the book of one of the stone circles that's mentioned. This is Whitemoor Stone Circle, one we used to visit on D&V night exercises quite a bit. And you'll find there's the pictures that John Hayward drew himself. He also took photographs and then did line drawings from them in the book. And lots of interesting information. So I thought I'd read to you just a little bit about what he says about Whitemoor Stone Circle. There are 17 stones standing, one fallen and one fairly obviously missing. If the original number was indeed 19, then the builders chose a figure unlikely to be considered by modern planners. But there were doubtless good reasons. It's not difficult to think of several. One entertaining speculation arises from the fact that the distance between any two more or less opposite stones is the same as that between the wickets on a cricket pitch. If you stand at the centre of the circle and look out over the broadest stone, roughly southeast, then about 200 yards away will be seen a menhir. This was long ago adopted as a boundary mark between the Duchy of Cornwall land, DC, to the west, and the parishes of Throwley, TP, and Gidley, which both run up to this point from the east. And so there's a picture of the stone with the carvings in it representing the parishes GP and TP. And again, something you might not know about, or something you might just not miss as you wandered past this stone. So I get asked quite a lot about how I go about 365ing and how I work out which squares I'm going to visit. So I took the Dartmoor National Park OL28 map, and I just got a highlighter pen and I marked on the map every single square and where each item was. And then I started walking out on the moor and forgetting what I was meant to see. So as I said earlier, I then photocopied pages of the book and took those photocopies with me, and then I could sit in the area and read through them. Now, some of them have got so many items actually in the page that I find it difficult to actually find everything, and I have to go back. But this has been my method of doing it. The group that I run now on Facebook is going to produce its own Dartmoor 365 map, and it will actually have the original 1 mile squares on it, which will really help people realise where they are so they can work out what items they might find, or if they visit a square and they're not quite sure which square they're in. So that's certainly the way I do it, and it seems to work well for me, but others have found lots of different ways of doing things. And really 365ing is about enjoying the moor and the 365 square miles in a way that suits you. So I said that this hobby has somewhat grown beyond what I expected, which is a bit of an understatement, really. Apart from the obsession of going from a blank grid like this one to a fully coloured in grid, well, this one's getting close to that, and keeping records of where you've been and when you've been and taking photographs in each square that you go to. I started a Facebook group 2 or 3 years ago with a plan of having maybe 20 of my friends take an interest in it, and currently it sits at 5,500 and a few more members who post their thoughts and experiences of each square, giving the square reference as they pass through. And it seems to grow every day, about 5 or 6 new members every day. It's got to the stage now where we actually meet once a year and have a cream tea at the Two Bridges Hotel, and people discuss how they enjoy 365ing, how they do it, what they get up to. And it's become a massive family. I should think we'll meet many of the people out on the moor when we walk, and sometimes we pass each other without realising we're fellow 365ers. We have little badges that we had made, and sometimes we recognise each other or from a matching car sticker or similar. Other times we post on the site and people say, oh, I was there today, didn't see you. So it's going to grow and grow, I think. I think the books had to be republished, or at least reprinted many times, and I hope it carries on. It's become a bit of a sort of phenomenon on the moor, and even the magazines here is Active Dartmoor, with a little bit on the front cover about Dartmoor 365ing, have asked me to do little write-ups about what Dartmoor 365ing actually is, a term that I coined to myself from the title of the book. And we got a lovely double spread in this summer's edition, explaining what Dartmoor 365ing is and what the book's all about. So perhaps next time you're up on the moor, or if you've never been, do visit. Stunning place. Go to the Dartmoor National Park Authority shops or some of the other local shops, so it's good to support the moor. Get a copy of this because you'll be hooked, and you can actually explore the moor by walking on it and travelling in the car, cycling, what other people do, or just from your armchair. I sit at home and I look through this and I sort of plan places that I'd like to visit, and then try and work out a route to take in all the squares. It's been great fun. I can't see it stopping, and I think from year to year it's going to grow and grow. So if you are a 365er, do leave a comment below, and if not, and you take to 365ing, let me know as well, because it's great fun, and I think once you've started, you certainly won't be able to give up.